What if the past is hiding secrets so bizarre they sound like something out of a wild fantasy novel? Ancient history isn't just about dusty scrolls and crumbling ruins. It's a treasure trove of stories so strange they'll make you question everything you thought you knew. From empires that rose and fell in the blink of an eye to everyday practices that would leave us utterly baffled today, the ancient world was a place of jaw-dropping ingenuity and sheer head-scratching weirdness. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. 25 ancient history facts that sound absolutely fake but are 100% true. Picture this: the Romans, masters of engineering and law, also believed urine was the ultimate multi-purpose cleaner, yes, even for their mouths. Or how about the fact that Cleopatra, the legendary queen of Egypt, lived closer to the invention of the iPhone than she did to the construction of the Great Pyramid? These aren't just quirky trivia tidbits, they're glimpses into a world so different from ours it might as well be another planet. And yet, these were real people with real lives, solving problems and making choices that sometimes defy all logic. But here's the thing, these facts aren't just random oddities. They're clues that help us unravel the minds of our ancestors, showing us how they saw the world, what they valued, and just how creative or downright strange human beings can be. So if you're ready to have your mind blown, to laugh in disbelief, and maybe even cringe a little, stick around, because history isn't just about memorizing dates and names. It's about uncovering the incredible, the unexpected, and the utterly unbelievable stories that shaped who we are today. And trust me, by the time we're done, you'll never look at the past the same way again. You might think modern toothpaste with its minty freshness is strange enough, but ancient Rome took oral hygiene to a whole new level of weird. Believe it or not, they used urine as mouthwash, and not just any urine, but the stuff collected from public urinals, specifically because it was packed with ammonia. That's right, Romans would swish it around their mouths, believing it whitened their teeth and kept their gums healthy. And before you cringe too hard, there's actually some science behind it. Ammonia is a natural cleaning agent, so in a world before dental labs and fluoride, it kinda worked. But here's where it gets even wilder. Urine wasn't just a DIY health hack. It was big business. Cities had public urinals where people could, well, contribute, and the collected liquid was then sold to laundries, tanneries, and yes, even dentists. The poet Catullus actually mocked a man named Egnatius for his gleaming white smile, writing that he must be pissing bright from all that urine rinsing. Imagine walking through the streets of Rome, passing these bustling urine collection points, knowing some of it would end up in someone's mouth. What's fascinating isn't just the shock value, it's what this tells us about ancient ingenuity. Without modern chemistry, Romans looked at what they had and thought, how can we make this useful? Even something as gross as urine became a resource, a commodity, even a status symbol if your smile was bright enough. So next time you squeeze minty gel onto your toothbrush, spare a thought for the Romans who turned public pee into a dental revolution. Here's a fact that'll make your brain do a double take. Cleopatra, the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt, lived closer in time to the Apollo moon landing than she did to the construction of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Let that sink in for a second. Her reign stretched from 69 to 30 BC, while the Great Pyramid was built around 2560 BC, making it older to her than she is to us today. That's a gap of nearly 2,500 years between the pyramid builders and Cleopatra's rule. Think about what that means. By the time Cleopatra was born, the pyramids were already ancient history, just as her reign is ancient history to us. The Romans were building their empire, the Greeks had long since peaked, and the world was full of bustling cities and advanced technology, by ancient standards anyway. Meanwhile, the pyramids had already been standing for so long that their original purpose was fading into myth. Even Herodotus, the so-called father of history, who wrote about them centuries before Cleopatra, could only guess at how they were built. This timeline flips our whole perception of ancient Egypt on its head. We tend to lump it all together: pharaohs, pyramids, hieroglyphs, but the civilization lasted so long that Cleopatra was as distant from the pyramid builders as we are from the fall of Rome. It's like if someone today casually referenced events from the Dark Ages as if they were recent history. And here's the kicker: Cleopatra herself probably found the pyramids just as mysterious as we do. She ruled an Egypt that was already a melting pot of Greek and Egyptian culture, where the old ways were fading fast, the Sphinx's nose already missing by her time. The pyramid's original smooth limestone casing mostly stripped away for other buildings. The past wasn't just a foreign country to her, it was a lost world. So next time you picture Cleopatra gazing at the pyramids, remember, she wasn't some contemporary of the builders. She was more like a tourist marveling at ruins just like us. And that's the wild thing about history: it's not one long, unbroken line. It's full of gaps, forgotten chapters, and moments so far apart they barely feel connected. But that's what makes it so fascinating. Long before snooze buttons and smartphone alarms, the ancient Greeks were already solving the problem of waking up on time, with a gadget that would make even modern engineers nod in respect. Meet Plato's alarm clock, a brilliant water-powered device from the 4th century BC that didn't just tell time but literally sang when it was time to get moving. Imagine this: a ceramic vessel filled with water, designed to slowly drain through a siphon until whoosh, the last drops triggered a pipe to whistle like a boiling kettle. No gentle chimes here. This was an ancient wake-up call you couldn't ignore. But why would Plato, the philosopher famous for pondering the meaning of life and ideal societies, need an alarm clock? Simple: his academy in Athens ran on schedule. Lectures started at dawn, and students then as now weren't always eager to rise with the sun. So Plato's invention wasn't just a quirky experiment, it was a practical tool to keep his school running like clockwork. The whistle didn't just mark the hour, it signaled the start of debates, the shift between lessons, and maybe even the end of a particularly long-winded speech. What's truly remarkable is how this device reveals the Greeks' obsession with precision. They didn't just track time with sundials or guesswork, they engineered solutions. The water clock, or clepsydra, was already used in courtrooms to limit speeches, but Plato's addition of an alarm transformed it into something proactive. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of setting a timer to avoid binging an entire series in one night, except instead of Netflix, it was Socrates holding forth on ethics. And here's the kicker: this wasn't even the first alarm clock. Earlier versions might have used falling pebbles or bells, but Plato's whistling design shows how innovation built on itself. Centuries later, the Byzantines would create elaborate clock towers, and medieval monks would rig up candle clocks with nails that clattered into metal trays at set intervals. But the seed of all that, a philosopher's determination to make sure his students showed up on time. So next time your phone alarm jolts you awake, remember, the struggle against oversleeping is older than democracy. And while we've swapped whistling water for digital beeps, the goal hasn't changed. Whether it's 4th century BC Athens or your morning commute, time waits for no one, not even Plato. The Great Pyramid of Giza isn't just an ancient marvel, it's a mountain of stone so massive, its numbers sound like something out of a superhero movie. Picture this: 2.3 million limestone blocks, each weighing between 2.5 and 15 tons. That's like stacking 25 jumbo jets worth of rock, one piece at a time, without cranes, trucks, or modern tools. To put it another way, a single block from the pyramid could outweigh 2 full-grown elephants, and there are enough of them to stretch from New York to Los Angeles if laid end to end. What's even crazier, the precision. These blocks were cut and placed with gaps so tight you can't slip a credit card between them. No mortar, just perfect angles. A feat that would challenge today's engineers with laser levels and computer models. Some theories suggest ramps were used, but even that's mind-boggling. A ramp big enough to haul those stones would have required more material than the pyramid itself. Others propose internal spiral ramps or even counterweight systems, but no one's found definitive proof. And here's the kicker. The pyramid's base is leveled to within just 2 centimeters across an area larger than 10 football fields. Imagine trying to lay a foundation that precise using nothing but ropes, wooden tools, and human muscle. Modern skyscrapers with their steel beams and satellite-guided lasers don't always match that accuracy. The real mystery isn't just how they built it, it's why they went to such extremes. This wasn't just a tomb, it was a statement, a testament to human ambition. Every block hauled into place, every inch calculated, speaks to a society that refused to be limited by what seemed impossible. Even now, staring up at those weathered stones, you can't help but wonder, what else did they know that we've forgotten? Imagine getting your paycheck not in cash or credit, but in cold, frothy mugs of beer. That was everyday life in ancient Mesopotamia, where beer wasn't just a drink, it was money, fuel, and even a form of tax payment. The world's first known salary slips, etched into clay tablets in cuneiform script, show workers from builders to scribes being paid in daily beer rations. A typical laborer might earn around 2 liters for a day's work, while high-ranking officials could pocket up to 5. But this wasn't just happy hour on the job, it was a carefully calculated system sustaining an entire economy. The Mesopotamians didn't just love beer, they needed it. In a land where clean water was scarce, beer, with its fermentation process killing off bacteria, was safer to drink than most river water. It was thick, nutritious, and often flavored with dates or honey, making it more like a liquid meal than a modern lager. Temples doubled as breweries, churning out vast quantities not just for worship but as a form of centralized wealth. When rulers demanded taxes, they often collected them in barley, the key ingredient for beer, or in the finished product itself. Here's where it gets even more fascinating. Beer became a tool of power. The famous Code of Hammurabi, one of history's earliest law codes, specifically regulated beer parlors, threatening unscrupulous tavern keepers with drowning if they watered down their brew or overcharged. Meanwhile, temple records from the city of Uruk detail how much beer was allotted to different workers, proving it was as much a currency as silver or grain. Even diplomatic gifts between city-states included shipments of beer, turning barrels into a form of international diplomacy. What makes this system so remarkable isn't just its practicality, it's how deeply beer was woven into society's fabric. Unlike coins or paper money, which are abstract symbols of value, beer had inherent worth. You could drink it, trade it, or offer it to the gods. It fed armies, fueled construction projects, and even bridged social gaps. A laborer's beer ration might be weaker than a priest's, but both relied on the same fundamental truth. In Mesopotamia, if you controlled the beer, you controlled the people. So next time you sip a pint, think of those ancient accountants carefully tallying beer shipments on clay tablets. They weren't just keeping track of groceries, they were running an economy where happiness, survival, and power all flowed from the same cup. And that's the real buzz. History's first paycheck was literally something you could pour and cheers with. Long before unions and picket signs, the workers who built the tombs of Egypt's pharaohs staged what might be history's first recorded strike. And they did it with the kind of bureaucratic precision that would make a modern office worker proud. In the year 1155 BCE, during the reign of Ramses III, artisans and laborers downed tools and marched to the temples of Thebes, demanding what they were owed: grain, oil, and clothing, their standard wages for months of backbreaking work. What's astonishing isn't just that they protested, but that they documented it. The Turin Strike Papyrus, a crumbling sheet of ancient paperwork, survives as the world's oldest known record of collective labor action, complete with dates, grievances, and even the officials' panicked responses. These weren't rebellious slaves or desperate peasants. They were skilled craftsmen, the elite workers of Deir el-Medina, the village responsible for carving and decorating royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. Their jobs were prestigious, but when deliveries of food and supplies stalled for weeks, they reached a breaking point. The papyrus recounts how they gathered at the mortuary temples, shouting, "We are hungry," and refusing to return to work until their rations arrived. One line reads, "We have come here because we are in need, because we have no clothes, no fish, no vegetables." Imagine the scene: respected artisans, normally invisible behind the grandeur of the tombs they built, stepping into the light to demand fairness. What's fascinating is how modern their tactics sound. They didn't riot or loot, they organized. The strikers sent negotiators to speak with officials, citing legal precedent. Is it right to do this to us? And even staging sit-ins at critical sites. When promises weren't kept, they walked out again, this time blocking access to grain stores. The authorities, terrified of disrupting the pharaoh's eternal preparations, eventually caved. Grain was released, and the workers returned to their chisels and pigments, but not before setting a precedent that echoes through millennia. This strike wasn't just about missed paychecks. It reveals a society where even the most powerful rulers relied on the goodwill of their workforce. Without these artisans, the tombs essential for the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife would remain unfinished. The workers knew their value, and they wielded it with shrewdness. The papyrus doesn't call them heroes or rebels. It simply records their actions as a matter of fact, as if to say, this is what happens when you ignore the people who build your world. So next time you grumble about a late paycheck, remember those Egyptian craftsmen. They proved that the fight for fair treatment isn't a modern invention, it's as ancient as the pyramids themselves. And their story, scratched onto fragile papyrus, reminds us that even in the shadow of gods and kings, ordinary people have always found ways to make their voices heard. When we picture Vikings, it's usually axes, longships, and battle cries, not whispered love poems under the moonlight. But one of history's best-kept secrets is that Norse warriors weren't just fierce raiders. They were also hopeless romantics who composed some of the most tender verses of their time. Take the 9th century poem "Give Me a Kiss, My Darling," where a love-struck Viking pleads, "Honey-tongued, you shouldn't refuse me a kiss, your words are sweeter than mead." This wasn't some lone exception. Viking sagas are filled with skaldic poetry dripping with longing, heartbreak, and even playful flirtation, proving that behind the horned helmets were hearts as fierce in love as they were in war. What makes these poems so fascinating isn't just their existence, it's how they flip the script on Viking culture. Skalds, the poets of the Norse world, held a status just below kings, spinning verses that celebrated everything from battlefield glory to the ache of unrequited love. One poem, the love song of Harold Hardrada, written by the same king who died fighting in England in 1066, boasts lines like, "The goddess of gold glances at me with eyes brighter than the moon." These weren't crude tavern chants, they were intricate, metaphor-laden works, often using elaborate wordplay called kennings, like calling a sword the wound serpent or the sea the whale road. But why does this matter? Because it shatters the one-dimensional barbarian stereotype. Vikings didn't just loot and pillage, they traded, settled, and built complex societies where poetry was as vital as warfare. A well-crafted verse could win a feud, secure an alliance, or woo a sweetheart far more effectively than a sack of silver. Even their legal system leaned on poetry. Disputes were sometimes settled through poetic duels, where the wittiest skalds could argue cases with rhymes instead of weapons. And here's the kicker: many of these love poems were composed by women. The Poetic Edda, a collection of Old Norse verses, includes heart-wrenching lines from female perspectives, like, "I dreamed you walked into this hall and my joy was boundless." In a world often painted as hyper-masculine, Viking women weren't just passive figures. They were skalds, rune carvers, and even chieftains in their own right. So the next time someone says Vikings were nothing but savages, hit them with a love poem. Behind every fearsome raider was a poet who could turn a battlefield into a ballad and a kiss into a masterpiece. After all, what's more human than declaring war on loneliness with nothing but words? Centuries before pandas became global symbols of conservation cuteness, these black and white bears were already diplomatic heavyweights, literally. The Han Dynasty, ruling China from 206 BC to 220 CE, didn't just admire pandas for their cuddly looks, they weaponized their charm as tools of statecraft. Historical records like the Book of Han reveal that emperors gifted panda pelts, and sometimes live bears, to neighboring rulers as gestures of peace, alliance, or thinly veiled dominance. Imagine receiving a living, bamboo-munching token of friendship from the most powerful empire on earth. Refusal wasn't really an option. This wasn't just about adorable bribery. Pandas were strategic choices. Native to the misty forests of Sichuan, they were exotic treasures, impossible to find outside China's borders. Giving one away was like handing over a piece of the empire's mystique, a tangible reminder of its vast and untouchable resources. The Book of Han mentions panda furs being traded to nomadic tribes along the Silk Road, not as casual gifts but as calculated moves to pacify restless neighbors. A panda pelt draped over a rival chieftain's throne was more than a luxury, it was a silent message. This wealth, this power flows from us. But here's the twist, pandas weren't just diplomatic chess pieces. They were cultural icons long before the Han Dynasty. Ancient texts describe them as mythical hybrids, part bear, part dragon, believed to possess mystical powers. Their striking black and white fur symbolized the balance of yin and yang, making them living emblems of harmony. When an emperor gifted a panda, he wasn't just offering a bear, he was sharing a fragment of Chinese cosmology, a subtle way to say our ways are worth embracing. Fast forward 2,000 years and the strategy hasn't changed much. Modern China's panda diplomacy loans the animals to zoos worldwide, softening geopolitical tensions with a flood of viral cub videos. But the Han Dynasty's genius lay in recognizing something timeless. Few things disarm like wonder. Whether it's a 3rd century BC chieftain stroking a rare pelt or a 21st century crowd cooing over a cub rolling in hay, the effect is the same. Power isn't always about force. Sometimes it's about knowing exactly what will make the world smile. So next time you see a panda on a zoo live stream, remember, those clumsy, bamboo-chewing ambassadors are part of a tradition older than the Great Wall itself. And the Han emperors, they'd probably nod in satisfaction, knowing their favorite diplomatic tactic still works like a charm. Imagine lying down for surgery 7,000 years ago. No anesthesia, no sterile tools, just someone carefully drilling a hole in your skull with a sharpened stone. This wasn't some horror movie scenario. It was trepanation, the oldest known surgical procedure, practiced across continents long before the wheel or written language. Neolithic skulls found in France, Peru, and Africa show precise circular or square holes, some with clear signs of healing around the edges. That means not only did these Stone Age surgeons have the skill to penetrate bone without shattering it, but their patients often walked away alive, their bodies growing new bone over the wounds months or even years later. Why would anyone willingly undergo such a terrifying operation? The answers are as varied as the cultures that practiced it. Some anthropologists believe trepanation was used to treat head injuries, perhaps relieving pressure from fractures or blood clots. Others think it had spiritual significance, a way to release evil spirits causing seizures or mental illness. In the highlands of ancient Peru, where trepan skulls are especially common, the procedure might have been a rite of passage or even a form of elite privilege. One Andean skull shows 5 separate holes, all healed, suggesting the person was considered important enough to endure multiple sessions. The real shock isn't just that they tried it, it's how often they succeeded. Researchers studying these skulls estimate survival rates as high as 80% in some regions, a staggering number given the era's limitations. The tools varied: flint blades in Europe, obsidian in the Americas, even shark teeth in the Pacific. But the technique was startlingly consistent. Surgeons avoided critical veins and sinuses, often stopping just short of the brain's delicate membrane. Some skulls even show evidence of aftercare, like herbal poultices or protective coverings made of gold or coconut shell. What's most humbling is realizing these ancient healers weren't groping in the dark. They had an intimate understanding of anatomy, honed through generations of trial and observation. A trep and skull from ancient Croatia, dating back 4,000 years, reveals the surgeon intentionally avoided a thick ridge of bone where damage could be fatal, knowledge that wouldn't be formally documented until the Renaissance. So next time you marvel at modern brain surgery's robotic precision, remember, the first neurosurgeons worked with stone tools and sheer intuition. Their legacy isn't just holes in bone, it's proof that compassion and curiosity are as old as humanity itself. And those healed edges on ancient skulls, they're silent testimonials to the earliest triumphs of science over suffering. In the scorching deserts of ancient Persia, where summer temperatures could melt stone, engineers pulled off a feat that defies logic. They kept ice frozen without electricity, without modern insulation, even without consistent shade. The secret, the Yakchul, a domed ice house that wasn't just a primitive cooler but a masterpiece of passive thermodynamics. Picture a giant beehive made of mud bricks, towering up to 60 feet high, with walls so thick they could shrug off the desert sun. But the real magic was inside, where even in the peak of summer, blocks of ice sat untouched by the heat, preserving food, chilling drinks, and even making possible the world's first sorbets. The Yakchul's brilliance lay in its layered design. At night, desert temperatures could plummet, and Persians would channel water into shallow pools or trenches where it froze under the clear, cold sky. Before dawn, workers hauled these delicate sheets of ice into the Yakchul's depths, stacking them like glistening bricks. Then the dome's physics took over. Its conical shape funneled hot air upward and out, while subterranean insulation, often a mix of sand, clay, and even goat hair, acted like a natural thermos, slowing heat transfer to a crawl. Some Yakchuls even featured badgers, wind-catcher towers that scooped up breezes, cooled them as they passed over underground water channels, and circulated the chilled air downward like an ancient air conditioner. But this wasn't just about ice. The Yakchul transformed Persian cuisine and medicine. Wealthy households could enjoy sherbets flavored with rosewater and pomegranate centuries before gelato reached Italy. Apothecaries stored delicate herbs and potions that would have spoiled in the heat. And during feasts, nobles clinked glasses of chilled wine while their Mesopotamian neighbors sweltered with lukewarm brews. The Yakchul became so essential that by the Sasanian Empire it was a status symbol, a marker of sophistication that separated the civilized from the merely surviving. What's astonishing isn't just the engineering, it's the mindset. While other cultures saw ice as a fleeting winter gift, Persian thinkers treated it as a resource to be harnessed. They observed how evaporative cooling worked in Qanat's underground aqueducts and adapted it. They noticed how certain materials trapped coolness and doubled down on them. This wasn't magic, it was applied science centuries before the word thermodynamics existed. And it worked so well that some Yakchuls remained functional into the 20th century, their muted domes still exhaling whispers of winter in the heart of summer. So the next time you crank your fridge thermostat, spare a thought for those ancient engineers. They didn't just beat the heat, they outsmarted it, turning the desert's cruelty into a canvas for ingenuity. And the proof isn't in some dusty manuscript, it's in the ruins that still stand today, whispering, if you think you're the first to want a cold drink in July, think again. For centuries, the Trojan War was dismissed as pure myth, a fantastical tale spun by Homer with no more historical weight than a comic book. That is, until a brash, self-made German businessman named Heinrich Schliemann arrived in Hisarlik, Turkey in the 1870s, shovel in hand, convinced he could prove the skeptics wrong. Armed with little more than a dog-eared copy of the Iliad and an unshakable belief in its accuracy, Schliemann tore into the hillside, uncovering not just one ancient city, but 9, stacked like layers of a forgotten cake. And right there, nestled between the ruins, he found something that would rewrite history. A trove of gold jewelry, weapons, and a battered fortress wall that matched Homer's descriptions down to the last detail. The world gasped. Troy wasn't just real, its bones were buried right where the poet had said they'd be. But Schliemann's discovery came with a twist even he didn't anticipate. The site wasn't a single city, it was a time capsule of civilizations, each built atop the rubble of the last, the legendary Troy of Priam and Hector. It might have been Troy 7, a layer dating to around 1250 BCE, where archaeologists found evidence of fire, violent destruction, and hastily buried bodies, clues that fit Homer's account of a sacked city. But here's where it gets messy. Schliemann, in his eagerness, blasted straight through this layer to reach Troy 2, an even older and wealthier settlement he wrongly declared the real Troy. His recklessness destroyed priceless evidence, leaving modern scholars to piece together the truth like detectives at a crime scene. The debate over which Troy matches Homer's epic still rages. Some argue Troy 6, with its grand palaces and towering walls, better fits the Iliad's description of a mighty city. Others point to Troy 7's signs of war-charred buildings, arrowheads embedded in walls, as proof this was the battlefield where Achilles and Hector clashed. The irony, Schliemann's obsession with proving Homer right might have obliterated the very evidence he sought. Yet his legacy isn't just controversy. His work ignited archaeology as we know it, proving that ancient myths could be grounded in real places and events. And every artifact pulled from Hisarlik's dust, a shattered vase, a child's toy, a soldier's sword, whispers the same truth: Troy wasn't just a story. It was a home, a battleground, a city that rose and fell to the beat of human ambition. So the next time someone calls a legend just a myth, remember, sometimes the most extraordinary tales are the ones waiting for someone stubborn enough to dig. Hollywood loves to show gladiators feasting on giant haunches of meat, bulking up for battle like modern bodybuilders, but the truth is stranger and far more surprising. Recent bone analyzers from gladiator graves in Ephesus reveal these warriors weren't devouring steak and protein shakes. Instead, their diet was shockingly plant-based, a thick, porridge-like mix of barley, beans, lentils, and a key ingredient that sounds downright bizarre: charcoal ash. Yes, you heard that right. These fighters were essentially powered by ancient superfood gruel with a side of fireplace remnants. So why ash? Turns out it wasn't some primitive mistake. Roman medical texts like those by Galen actually recommended ash as a calcium supplement, crucial for bone strength. After workouts or injuries, gladiators would mix it into their meals, creating a natural antacid and mineral boost. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of chugging a recovery shake, minus the artificial flavors. And their carb-heavy diet, far from a weakness, it provided slow-burning energy for endurance in the arena. Barley, in particular, was prized for its ability to sustain stamina, meaning gladiators weren't just brawlers. They were more like marathon runners with swords. But here's the twist: this diet wasn't just about health. It was also about economics. Feeding hundreds of gladiators in training schools was expensive, and meat was a luxury. Barley and legumes, on the other hand, were cheap, filling, and easy to store. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder even quipped that gladiators were nicknamed horderii, barley men, because of their staple food. Yet despite the lack of prime rib, their bones show remarkable density and healing, suggesting they weren't malnourished. In fact, some historians argue their plant-heavy diet might have given them an edge, reducing inflammation and speeding recovery between bouts. The real kicker: gladiators were celebrated for their physiques, which were lean and muscular, not hulking. Contemporary descriptions praise their agility and definition, qualities better suited to a diet rich in complex carbs than to slabs of meat. Even their fat layers, visible in some mosaics, may have been strategic extra padding to cushion against shallow cuts while keeping them nimble. So next time you see a gladiator movie with a blood-smeared warrior tearing into a roast, remember, the real champions of the Colosseum were likely spooning up a humble, ash-flecked stew. And if their bones are any indication, it worked. Forget protein obsession sometimes, the strongest warriors are the ones who know the power of plants. We've all heard the story. Julius Caesar, surrounded by enemies in Alexandria, sets his ships ablaze and the flames leap to the legendary library, consuming centuries of knowledge in a single tragic night. It's a cinematic moment, the kind of dramatic loss that fuels documentaries and Hollywood scripts alike. But here's the twist, that story might be more fiction than fact. Historians like Plutarch, who chronicled Caesar's life, never actually blamed him for the library's total destruction. Instead, they hint at a slower, far less sensational demise, one fueled not by a single blaze, but by centuries of riots, neglect, and bureaucratic indifference. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a building. It was the beating heart of the ancient world's intellect, a sprawling complex of lecture halls, gardens, and shelves stacked with an estimated 400,000 scrolls, everything from Euclid's geometry to Aristoteles' heliocentric theory. Yet its downfall wasn't a sudden inferno. The first blow likely came during Caesar's siege in 48 BCE, when fires did damage parts of the city's royal quarter, possibly destroying some stored scrolls. But the library itself, it likely survived, limping along for centuries. Strabo, writing 30 years later, still mentions scholars working there. The real culprits were quieter but just as destructive. Around 272 CE, Emperor Aurelian's troops sacked Alexandria during a revolt, turning the city into a battleground. Then came Christian riots in the 4th century, when zealous mobs targeted pagan institutions, including the library's daughter institution, the Serapeum. By this point, funding had dried up, scrolls were rotting unchecked, and the political will to preserve knowledge had evaporated. The final nail, the Arab conquest in 642 CE, though even that story is murky. The famous tale of Caliph Omar ordering scrolls burned as fuel for bathhouses is likely later propaganda. What's fascinating isn't just the timeline, it's how the myth of the single fire took hold. The idea of a lone catastrophe feels more poetic, a clear villain and a tragic climax. But the truth is messier. The library didn't vanish in a night, it faded like ink on neglected parchment, victim not to flames alone but to humanity's endless capacity for chaos and complacency. And that's the real lesson. Knowledge isn't lost in dramatic acts of destruction. It's eroded by indifference, one neglected page at a time. Long before Galileo pointed his telescope at the stars and Einstein penned his theories, an ancient Indian scholar named Sayana was already wrestling with one of physics' greatest mysteries, the speed of light. In his 14th century commentary on the Rig Veda, one of humanity's oldest sacred texts, he made a jaw-dropping assertion: sunlight travels 2,200 yojanas in half a nimisha. Convert those ancient units, and you get a figure chillingly close to modern science's calculation, just under 300,000 kilometers per second, within a 1% margin of error. Now, let's unpack how staggering this really is. Sayana wasn't working with lab equipment or stopwatches. He derived this number from analyzing Vedic verses describing the sun's movement, using time units like the nimisha, about 16 milliseconds, and distance measures like the yojana, roughly 13 kilometers. But here's the kicker: his math wasn't guesswork. The Surya Siddhanta, an even older Indian astronomical text, had already laid the groundwork with precise equations for planetary motion, proving these scholars weren't just philosophers, they were rigorous scientists. What's even more fascinating is the context. Sayana's commentary wasn't some fringe hypothesis. It was part of a millennia-old tradition of Vedic scholarship that blended spirituality with empirical observation. Hindu cosmology had long described light as both a physical and metaphysical force, with texts like the Vishnu Purana comparing the sun's rays to the spread of divine knowledge. But Sayona took it further, treating light as measurable, quantifiable, a radical idea for an era when most cultures still saw celestial phenomena as purely mystical. Critics might argue it's coincidence that ancient units could align with modern physics by chance, but consider this: Indian astronomers had already calculated the Earth's diameter, the Moon's orbit, and even the concept of gravity centuries before Newton. The Bhaskara Roman II in the 12th century described planetary attraction using the term Gurutvakarshan, a precursor to gravitational theory. So when Sayona pinned down light speed, he wasn't pulling numbers from thin air, he was standing on the shoulders of giants who'd turned the cosmos into a solvable equation. And here's the real mind bender. Modern physicists didn't confirm light speed until the late 19th century, using mirrors and rotating wheels. Yet somehow, in the ink-stained margins of a Vedic commentary, Sayona got there first. Whether through divine inspiration or sheer genius, his work reminds us that scientific breakthroughs aren't confined to labs or textbooks. Sometimes they're hidden in plain sight, waiting for the world to catch up. Forget soccer penalties or basketball fouls. The ancient Maya played a ball game where losing could cost you your life. Known as pits, this wasn't just a sport. It was a sacred ritual woven into the fabric of Mesoamerican cosmology, with stakes as high as the heavens themselves. Players clad in heavy padding of leather and wood would battle on stone courts, using only their hips, elbows, and knees to keep a solid rubber ball weighing up to 9 pounds in motion. The rules were simple yet brutal. Let the ball touch the ground or fail to score through the towering stone hoops, and you might find yourself on the wrong end of a sacrificial knife. But why such extreme consequences? The answer lies in the Popol Vuh, the Maya's sacred text where the ball game is more than recreation. It's a cosmic battleground. The story follows the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who challenge the gods of the underworld to a game of pits. After outwitting their opponents with skill and trickery, the twins ultimately face decapitation, only to be reborn as the sun and moon. This myth wasn't just entertainment. It mirrored real-life games where losers, often prisoners of war, were sacrificed in ceremonies meant to honor the gods and ensure cosmic order. Their blood spilled on the court was seen as nourishment for the earth, a literal payment to keep the world in balance. The game's symbolism ran even deeper. The ball itself represented the sun's journey across the sky, while the court stood as a portal between the earthly and supernatural realms. Scoring a goal through the high-mounted hoop was akin to guiding the sun through the underworld at night, a feat so rare it was considered a divine intervention. Some scholars believe only a handful of goals were ever scored in the game's centuries-long history, turning each one into a moment of religious ecstasy. What's chilling is how seamlessly sport and spirituality intertwined. Modern athletes play for trophies. Maya players competed for their lives, with every match a reenactment of celestial struggle. Archaeologists have even found carvings showing victorious captains holding the severed heads of their opponents, a grisly reminder that for the Maya, there was no distinction between the sacred and the deadly. Yet beneath the violence lay a profound respect for the game's power. Courts were built at the heart of cities, aligned with stars and solstices. Kings often played to showcase their divine right to rule, proving their connection to the gods through athletic prowess. Even the rubber for the balls harvested from sacred trees was considered a gift from the deities, a tangible link between earth and sky. So next time you complain about a referee's bad call, remember the Maya, who turned competition into a matter of life, death, and cosmic destiny. Their games weren't just played, they were lived, breathed, and ultimately sacrificed for. And in the echoing footsteps of those ancient players, we catch a glimpse of a world where every bounce of the ball was a heartbeat of the universe itself. 2,000 years before silicon chips and touchscreens, a ship sank off the coast of Greece carrying what might be history's first analog computer. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered in 1901 by sponge divers, looked at first like a lump of corroded bronze. But when archaeologists painstakingly cleaned it, they uncovered something astonishing. A complex clockwork device of interlocking gears, tiny inscriptions, and dials that could predict solar eclipses, track the Olympic Games, and even model the irregular orbit of the moon. This wasn't just ancient engineering, it was a masterpiece of precision that rewrote our entire understanding of Greek technological prowess. What makes the mechanism so revolutionary is its sheer sophistication. X-ray scans reveal at least 30 meshing bronze gears, some with teeth cut to exacting angles to account for celestial irregularities. The main dial, likely operated by a hand crank, moved pointers that showed the positions of the Sun, Moon, and 5 known planets across the zodiac. Another dial tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympics, while a tiny rotating sphere displayed lunar phases. But the real genius lies in its eclipse predictor, a specialized gear that factored in the Saros cycle, a repeating 18-year pattern of eclipses known to Babylonian astronomers. By turning the crank, a priest or scholar could see exactly when the next eclipse would darken the sky, down to the hour. For context, this level of mechanical complexity wouldn't reappear in Europe until medieval cathedral clocks, over a millennium later. Most historians assumed the ancients lacked the tools or knowledge to build such devices, but the Antikythera mechanism forces us to reconsider. Its gears employed differential gearing, a technique once thought invented in the 16th century, and its astronomical calculations rival those of 18th century orreries. Whoever built it didn't just understand math, they'd miniaturized the cosmos into a handheld machine. The burning question is, who made it? Clues point to Rhodes, home of famed astronomer Hipparchus, whose theories on lunar motion align eerily with the mechanism's functions. Cicero even wrote of a similar device crafted by Archimedes, though whether this is that legendary object remains debated. What's certain is that it wasn't unique. The mechanism's intricate craftsmanship suggests a tradition of such devices, most lost to time or melted down for their bronze, and that's what haunts historians. If this one survivor hints at a wider technological culture, how much more did the Greeks know? Were there other computers calculating tides, planetary alignments, or architectural stresses? The Antikythera mechanism doesn't just challenge our timeline of invention. It whispers of a vanished world where science and art intertwined, where the boundaries between myth and machinery were far blurrier than we ever imagined. So next time you check your smartwatch for the weather, remember, the ancients might have beaten us to the punch by 2,000 years. Long before modern engineers dreamed of crossing rivers beneath their beds, the ancient Babylonians pulled off a feat that still boggles the mind, a fully functional tunnel beneath the mighty Euphrates. Built around 600 BCE under the reign of Queen Semiramis, this architectural marvel wasn't just a narrow passage but a grand, brick-lined thoroughfare wide enough for 2 chariots to pass side by side. Picture the scene: Babylonian laborers working without pumps or reinforced concrete, somehow diverting the river's flow long enough to construct a watertight corridor beneath its swirling currents, all while keeping their city's water supply intact. The tunnel's design was as ingenious as it was ambitious. Greek historian Herodotus, never one to skip a juicy detail, described it as vaulted with baked bricks sealed with bitumen, a natural tar that made the structure impervious to leaks. But here's the kicker: the tunnel didn't just serve as a secret escape route or a novelty. It connected the 2 halves of Babylon, seamlessly linking the royal palace on one bank with the temple of Zeus on the other. In a city famed for its hanging gardens and towering ziggurats, this underwater passage might have been its most practical wonder, turning what was once a logistical nightmare into a quick commute. Yet, like so many ancient innovations, the tunnel's brilliance made it a target. When Persian King Cyrus the Great set his sights on Babylon in 539 BC, he didn't just storm the gates, he outsmarted them. Recognizing the tunnel's reliance on the Euphrates' natural flow, Cyrus ordered his engineers to build an upstream dam, diverting the river entirely. As the water levels dropped, the tunnel's entrance lay exposed, and Persian troops marched right in, draining both the river and Babylon's defenses in one strategic swoop. What's haunting about this story isn't just the engineering, it's the irony. The same tunnel designed to unite a city became its undoing, a lesson in how even the grandest innovations carry vulnerabilities. Today, nothing remains of Semirames's tunnel but scattered bricks and Herodotus's awestruck account. Yet its legacy lives on in every subway and underwater passage we take for granted, a silent tribute to those Babylonian visionaries who dared to build where no one thought possible. So next time you're stuck in traffic underground, remember, you owe that convenience to a queen who looked at a river and saw not an obstacle but an opportunity. In the lavish dining rooms of ancient Rome, where exotic dishes were a symbol of status, few things screamed wealth louder than a plate of flamingo tongues. This wasn't just a quirky snack. It was the ultimate flex, a delicacy so coveted that recipes for preparing it were meticulously recorded in Apicius, the world's oldest surviving cookbook. Picture this: servers carrying platters of the vibrant bird's tongues, stuffed with pine nuts, peppercorns, and garum, a fermented fish sauce Romans drenched on everything. The dish wasn't just about taste, it was theater, a way for hosts to flaunt their access to the rarest ingredients the empire could plunder. But here's the twist: even the Romans thought this was too much. By the 1st century BC, sumptuary laws, strict rules designed to curb outrageous spending, specifically banned serving whole flamingos at banquets. The elites, of course, found loopholes. If they couldn't showcase the entire bird, they doubled down on its most exclusive part, the tongue. The poet Martial mocked this obsession, writing that a single flamingo tongue cost more than a live chicken, adding, "You're not paying for the flavor, you're paying for the gossip it sparks." The irony is delicious. Rome's leaders feared that such excess would corrupt moral values, yet their laws only fueled creative decadence. Wealthy citizens hosted secret dinners where flamingo tongues were served alongside dormice dipped in honey and parrotfish livers. The historian Suetonius even claims Emperor Vitellius once dished up a mythical shield of Minerva, a platter layered with peacock brains and lamprey milt, a dish so expensive it allegedly drained the treasury. What makes this culinary arms race fascinating isn't just the shock value, it's the hypocrisy. Rome's elite preached moderation while slurping down delicacies that required shipping live flamingos from North Africa, keeping them in ornate aviaries until their tongues were harvested. The Lex Fania of 161 BC tried capping meal expenses, but enforcement was laughable. Politicians caught violating the laws would simply pay the fine and host an even wilder feast next time. And perhaps that's the real legacy of the flamingo tongue craze. It wasn't just about food, it was a power play, a way to show that the rules didn't apply to you. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, what you ate wasn't just a meal, it was a manifesto. So next time you see a gold leaf dessert on Instagram, remember, the Romans invented food flexing, and they did it with way more feathers. While the ancient world developed alphabets and scrolls, the Inca Empire crafted records not with ink but with knots. Their quipu system, a dazzling array of colored strings, intricate knots, and meticulously placed chords, was far more than a primitive accounting tool. These stunning textile records, some stretching longer than a human arm, contained complex patterns that could track everything from grain stores to military movements across the empire's vast territories. But what's truly astonishing, recent breakthroughs suggest these knots might have been more than spreadsheets. They could be stories, poems, even histories waiting to be untangled. At first glance, a quipu resembles a fringe from a rug, dozens of hanging cords, each tied with clusters of knots. but the devil's in the details. The position, color, and spin direction of each string held meaning. A red cord might represent a soldier, while its knots tallied his weapons. A gold thread could encode tribute payments. Spanish chroniclers noted how Inca officials used quipus to manage an empire spanning modern-day Peru to Chile, all without a single written word. But here's where it gets wild. In 2017, researchers studying a set of quipus from a remote Andean village found something revolutionary. Unlike typical accounting quipus, these had unusual knot sequences that didn't match numerical data. Instead, they mirrored the structure of Quechua folktales, suggesting the chords might preserve spoken language itself. Imagine the implications. If quipus could encode narratives, the Inca may have had a writing system entirely unlike any other, one that recorded information in 3 dimensions, with texture and color as vital as the words on a page. Anthropologist Sabine Heil theorizes that certain quipus even used fiber types llama, alpaca, vicuña to signify different meanings, much like fonts change tone in print. A vicuña cord, soft and rare, might mark a sacred hymn, while coarse llama threads listed mundane supplies. Yet the full code remains elusive. Of the 1,000 known surviving quipus, only half have been deciphered, largely thanks to Spanish colonial documents pairing knots with census data. The rest, they're a linguistic Everest, without a Rosetta Stone to bridge knots and Quechua. Researchers are reverse engineering the system by comparing quipus to oral histories passed down in Andean communities. One breakthrough came when Heil interviewed descendants of quipu keepers in Peru's village of San Juan de Colata, who identified chords as representing specific lineages or events, proof that some quipus served as family records, not just tax ledgers. What's haunting is how close we came to losing this knowledge. The Spanish, intent on erasing Inca culture, burned thousands of quipus as idolatrous objects. Surviving examples were often dismissed as primitive until the 21st century. Now, each decoded knot whispers a tantalizing possibility. The Inca may have left us libraries, not ledgers. And as technology like 3D scanning helps map knot patterns invisible to the naked eye, we're inching closer to hearing stories tied, quite literally, in threads of the past. So the next time you jot a note, spare a thought for the quipu masters who turned rope into a language as rich and flexible as the empire it documented. Thousands of years before rap battles and playground taunts became cultural staples, the ancient Egyptians were already mastering the art of the burn, and they wrote it down for eternity. On a 3,500-year-old papyrus from the workmen's village of Deir el-Medina, a scribe immortalized what might be history's oldest recorded, "Yo mama, joke, your mother's wig is askew." At first glance, it sounds like mild teasing, but in the context of ancient Egyptian society, this was a cutting insult aimed straight at someone's social standing and pride. Why would something as simple as a crooked wig sting so deep? In Egypt's scorching heat, wigs weren't just fashion. They were status symbols, intricately braided from human hair or plant fibers and scented with precious oils. A neatly styled wig signaled wealth and dignity. A messy one, it hinted at sloppiness, poverty, or worse, a lack of respect for the gods, since appearance was tied to piety. For a scribe in training to hurl this jab wasn't just playground banter. It was a verbal jab at the target's family honor. But here's the twist: this insult wasn't scrawled in anger. It was part of a writing exercise, a way for apprentice scribes to practice their hieratic script while sharpening their wit. The same papyrus includes other gems like "Your face resembles a monkey's" and "You're like a broken ladder, useless to climb." These weren't random roasts, they were standardized insults, almost like a curriculum for learning humor alongside literacy. Think of it as ancient Egyptian 101 clapbacks, a textbook for aspiring bureaucrats who needed to hold their own in verbal sparring. The setting makes it even richer. Deir el-Medina wasn't just any village, it was home to the artisans building royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. These workers were elite, literate, and fiercely proud. Their writings reveal a community that loved board games, flirted in love poems, and yes, traded brutal insults. One ostracan, a pottery shard used as scrap paper, even records a dispute where a man angrily calls another the most scoundrel of scoundrels. Clearly, drama was alive and well in the desert. What's fascinating isn't just the existence of these jokes, it's what they tell us about humanity. Across 3 millennia, some things never change. The urge to one-up each other, the link between humor and social bonding, and the sheer creativity of a well-crafted insult. The scribes of Deir el-Medina didn't just build tombs, they left behind a snapshot of laughter, rivalry, and the timeless art of throwing shade. And honestly, your mother's wig is askew still hits harder than most modern roasts. Some burns, it seems, are truly eternal. 4,000 years before Shakespeare penned sonnets or poets swooned over roses, an unknown scribe in ancient Sumer pressed a stylus into wet clay, composing what we now recognize as the world's oldest love poem. Known as the Bridegroom Dumusid tablet, this fragile artifact from 2025 BC doesn't just whisper of romance, it sings with a passion that feels startlingly modern. Listen to these lines etched in cuneiform for eternity. Bridegroom, dear to my heart, goodly is your beauty, sweet as honey. Lion, dear to my heart, goodly is your beauty, sweet as honey. The imagery is simple yet profound, comparing a lover's allure to the richness of honey and the strength of a lion, metaphors that could slide effortlessly into a Valentine's Day card today. What's remarkable isn't just the poem's age, but its emotional resonance. The tablet, discovered in Nippur, modern-day Iraq, is part of a larger cycle celebrating the sacred marriage between Dumusid, a shepherd king, and the goddess Inanna. But forget stiff religious verse, this is sensual, pulsing with longing. Later lines describe Inanna bathing and anointing herself for her beloved, her excitement palpable. He shaped my loins with his fair hands. The shepherd Dumusid filled my lap with cream and milk. It's earthy, intimate, and unabashedly romantic, blurring the line between divine ritual and human desire. Compare this to modern love poetry, and the parallels are uncanny. The honey motif echoes Pablo Neruda's "I crave your mouth, your voice, your hair," while the lion's ferocity mirrors Rumi's "Be like a lion in courage." Even the structure repetition, vivid natural imagery mirrors contemporary spoken word poetry. But here's the twist, the Sumerians didn't see this as art for art's sake. These verses were likely performed during sacred rites, blending devotion and eros in a way that would make modern audiences blush. Yet the poem's survival is as miraculous as its content. Most cuneiform tablets record taxes or laws. This one captures a heartbeat. Archaeologists believe it was copied by scribes for centuries, treasured enough to outlast empires. And that's the real magic, realizing that across 4 millennia, the messy, glorious experience of love hasn't changed. The Sumerians felt the same dizzying rush we do, the same need to pin it down in words. So next time you text a heart emoji or scribble a note to your sweetheart, remember, you're part of a tradition as old as civilization itself, and Dumusid's poet would probably approve. During the brutal Punic Wars, when Carthage's navy was stretched thin against Rome's growing dominance, their generals resorted to a bluff so audacious it would make a poker champion blush. With resources dwindling after decades of conflict, they couldn't afford to build new warships, so they faked them. Picture this: ordinary wooden logs, hastily dragged to the shoreline, meticulously painted to resemble the sleek, deadly silhouettes of Carthaginian quinquiremes. From a distance, these dummy ships looked identical to the real thing. Same raised decks, same rows of painted oars, even dummy crews sketched onto their sides. When Roman scouts spotted them bobbing in the harbor, their reports would send shockwaves through the ranks. Carthage had reinforced its fleet overnight. This wasn't just deception, it was psychological warfare perfected centuries before the term existed. The Carthaginians knew the Romans feared their naval prowess, especially after early defeats like the Battle of Drepana. By amplifying the illusion of strength, they exploited that fear, buying precious time to regroup or divert Roman forces. Historians speculate these fake fleets were deployed during critical moments, like the siege of Lilybaeum, where morale and perception could tip the scales as decisively as actual firepower. Even if the ruse only delayed Roman attacks by days, those days could mean the difference between resupply and ruin. But here's the genius: the tactic worked precisely because it played into Roman expectations. Carthage's navy had a reputation for innovation, from hidden corvus boarding bridges to secret night maneuvers. The Romans expected tricks, so when they saw what appeared to be fresh ships, they hesitated, questioning whether to commit their already battered fleet. The historian Polybius hints at this in his accounts, noting how Roman commanders grew paranoid about shadows on the water, wasting resources scouting phantom fleets instead of pressing their advantage. What's fascinating is how modern this feels. Ancient commanders understood the theater of war long before Sun Tzu penned The Art of War. Like modern militaries using inflatable tanks or radar-jamming tech, the Carthaginians grasped that victory isn't just about force, it's about controlling the narrative. And sometimes all you need is a bucket of paint and a well-placed log to rewrite the story. Yet the irony is delicious. For all their cunning, Carthage still fell to Rome's relentless expansion. But those painted logs, they're a reminder that even in defeat, the Carthaginians fought with a creativity that still dazzles. In the end, their greatest weapon wasn't wood or sails. It was the unsettling power of a lie, floating just convincingly enough to make an empire pause. And isn't that the ultimate testament to their ingenuity? In the sweltering heat of Olympia in 720 BCE, a sprinter named Orsippus did something that would change the course of athletic history. He lost his loincloth mid-race and kept running. Whether it was an accident or a deliberate move to improve speed, the result was electrifying. Orsippus crossed the finish line victorious, his bare skin glistening under the Greek sun, and in that moment nudity became the new standard for Olympic competition. This wasn't just about practicality, it was a revolution, stripping away more than just clothing. It symbolized the Greek obsession with the human form as the ultimate expression of strength, discipline, and divine perfection. The Greeks didn't just tolerate nudity in sports, they celebrated it. To compete naked was to embrace arete, the ideal of excellence in mind and body. Athletes trained in the gymnasium, a word derived from gymnos meaning naked, where every sinew and muscle was honed for public admiration. The Olympics, dedicated to Zeus, were as much a religious ritual as an athletic event, and nudity bridged the sacred and the physical. A clothed athlete might hide imperfections or weaknesses, but nudity laid bare the truth of one's training and virtue. Even the statues of victorious athletes, like the iconic Discobolus, were carved in flawless, unclothed detail, immortalizing the body as a temple of human potential. But this tradition wasn't without its critics. Some city-states like Sparta took it further, with women competing nude in their own games, while others, like conservative Athens, initially balked at the spectacle. Philosophers like Plato argued that nudity cultivated moral courage, while critics whispered it was a decadent distraction. Yet the practice endured for centuries, shaping the very identity of the games. Athletes coated themselves in olive oil to highlight their musculature, dusted with fine sand to reduce glare, transforming their bodies into living sculptures under the Mediterranean sky. The legacy of nude competition echoes beyond antiquity. Modern bodybuilders strike poses that wouldn't look out of place on a Greek vase, and the Olympic spirit still exalts the human form's capabilities. Orsippus's accidental strip wasn't just a quirk of history, it was a declaration that true glory lies not in what we wear, but in what we dare to reveal. And in that, the ancients might have understood something we're still catching up to. Perfection isn't hidden, it's standing in the sun unashamed. Even in the annals of Rome's most outrageous emperors, Caligula stands apart, not just for his cruelty, but for the day he allegedly appointed his favorite horse, Incitatus, to the Senate. This wasn't some obscure honorary title. It was a seat in the most powerful governing body of the ancient world, a move so bizarre it's fueled debates for centuries. Was it the act of a madman, a scathing satire of Rome's corrupt elite, or just the whim of a ruler who'd grown bored with human limitations? Incitatus wasn't your average stable dweller. Ancient sources like Suetonius describe a life of outrageous luxury. A marble stall with an ivory manger, purple blankets, a color reserved for emperors, and even a staff of servants to cater to the horse's every need. Rumor had it Caligula planned to make him consul, the highest office in Rome, and once threatened to execute someone for disturbing the horse's pre-race beauty sleep. But here's where the story twists. This might not have been sheer insanity. Some historians argue Caligula was mocking the Senate itself, a body he saw as bloated and ineffective. By elevating his horse, he was essentially saying, "You're no better than a beast." The Senate had long been a thorn in Caligula's side. After a brief honeymoon period, he clashed constantly with its members, purging rivals and demanding worship as a living god. In this light, Incitatus's promotion feels less like delirium and more like performance art, a brutal punchline to underscore how little power the Senate actually held under his rule. The horse, after all, was at least loyal, yet the megalomania angle can't be ignored. Caligula's reign spiraled into paranoia and excess, from building a floating palace to declaring war on the sea itself. Was Incitatus just another prop in his theater of tyranny? The truth might be both. In a world where emperors straddled the line between man and deity, why not blur the lines further? If a god-king could command the waves, why couldn't he anoint his steed a senator? The irony: Incitatus likely outlived his master. Caligula was assassinated in 41 CE, his horse's political career cut short. But the legend endures, a perfect snapshot of power unchecked, where the line between genius and madness isn't just thin, it's trampled under hooves. Whether joke or jab, one thing's clear: in Caligula's Rome, even the absurd was possible. And perhaps that was the point all along. Long before George Romero's shambling corpses or The Walking Dead's hordes, the ancient Assyrians were already spinning tales of the dead returning to torment the living. Carved into clay tablets in 612 BC, the drought demon text describes a world where divine fury unleashes an unimaginable horror, the deceased clawing their way back from the underworld, driven by an insatiable hunger. But these weren't mindless flesh-eaters, they were revenants, spirits of the unburied or wronged, rising to punish the sinful and neglectful. The tablet, discovered in the ruins of Nineveh, reads like a nightmare. The dead outnumber the living, they roam the streets, their wails drying the rivers, their breath withering the crops. What's chilling isn't just the imagery, it's how familiar the fear feels. Like modern zombie lore, the Assyrian myth taps into primal anxieties: societal collapse, divine retribution, and the terror of being consumed by forces beyond control. But there's a key difference. While today's zombies often stem from viruses or lab accidents, the drought demon text frames the undead uprising as moral reckoning. The gods, angry at human corruption, break the barrier between life and death, turning the natural order upside down. Sound familiar? It's the same narrative thread that runs through the Book of Revelation, or even the Day of the Dead, a punishment for humanity's hubris. The parallels don't stop there. Just as modern zombie stories reflect contemporary fears: nuclear war in Night of the Living Dead, pandemic chaos in 28 Days Later. The Assyrian myth mirrored its era's trauma. 612 BC was the year Nineveh fell, its empire collapsing under invasion and famine. The drought demon text may have been less a horror story and more a cautionary tale. This is what happens when you anger the gods. Even the zombies' method of spread feels eerily prescient. The text describes the demon's curse passing like a breath, infecting those who inhale it, a haunting foreshadowing of airborne pathogens. Yet the most striking contrast lies in the cure. Modern zombie tales often hinge on headshots or vaccines, but the Assyrian solution was ritual. To stop the dead, you had to appease the gods with offerings, purify the city with sacred fires, and critically, bury the corpses properly. In a way, their zombies were a call to remember tradition, to honor the dead before they turned against you. It's a poignant reminder that for the ancients, the line between myth and morality was razor thin. So the next time you binge a zombie flick, remember, the undead have been lurking in our imagination for millennia, and the drought demon tablet, it's proof that the scariest stories aren't about monsters, they're about us, our sins, and what happens when the past refuses to stay buried. So there you have it, history isn't just stranger than fiction. It's wilder, bolder, and more baffling than anything Hollywood could dream up. Romans brushing their teeth with urine, Vikings penning love poems, ancient Persians stockpiling ice in desert ovens. These aren't just quirky footnotes, they're proof that the past was a place of jaw-dropping creativity, audacity, and yes, sheer weirdness. Every one of these facts shatters the dusty stereotypes we cling to, revealing people who are just as inventive, flawed, and unpredictable as we are today. And that's the real takeaway. History isn't a static pile of dates and dusty artifacts. It's a living, breathing story of trial and error, triumph and absurdity. Who could have guessed that Cleopatra lived closer to our time than to the pyramids, or that the Inca might have encoded entire narratives in knotted strings? These aren't just fun trivia, they're invitations to look deeper, to question what else we've gotten wrong about the past, because for every fact we think we know, there are a dozen more waiting to upend everything. So now it's your turn. Which of these facts blew your mind the most? Was it the Babylonian tunnel under a river, the Maya ball game where losers faced sacrifice? Drop your favorite in the comments and let's geek out over just how bizarre the past really was. And if you're craving more mind-bending history, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, this is just the tip of the iceberg. The past has plenty more surprises up its sleeve, and we're just getting started.